My name is Sierra Mullen, and the day my life split in two started with a text message. I was between meetings, half thinking about a boring spreadsheet when my phone buzzed. It was my sister. No greeting, no warning, just one line sitting on my screen like a slap. Sold Grandma's house. Thanks for not being here. For a second, I thought I was reading it wrong. That house was the only thing my grandmother ever put in my name. The one concrete proof that, at least once, someone in my family chose me. I knew she had signed the will. I had seen the papers. I had held them. My chest tightened, but my hand stayed steady. I didn't text back paragraphs. I didn't call to scream. I answered with two words that said everything I needed to say without giving her anything at all. Understood. Fine. Then I put my phone face down on the table and called my lawyer. I sent him a photo of the message and a copy of the will. He went quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that makes your stomach drop. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost amused, like he was looking at a puzzle someone thought they were smart enough to solve. "She is in serious trouble," he said. "These documents do not look right." I did not know it yet, but that was the moment the sale stopped being a victory for my sister and started becoming something else entirely. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. My family had been running on the same script for as long as I can remember. In Richmond, Virginia, the house on our street was always Grandma Mullen's place, even when my parents, my sister, and I were the ones living in it. It was old and a little worn, but it was hers. The roles inside that house were simple. My older sister, Kendra Mullen, was the responsible one. She knew when the trash truck came and how much was left in each bank account. If a bill arrived, my parents stacked it on the kitchen table and waited for her to get home. She liked being the person everyone depended on, and they liked depending on her. I never fit that mold. I was the kid who would forget to charge her phone but remember every detail of a conversation. I left Richmond as soon as I could, taking contract work that moved from city to city. To my parents, that made me unstable, someone they updated after decisions were made. My father, Mark Mullen, did not have to spell that out. When something broke or a notice arrived, his first instinct was to ask, "Has Kendra seen this?" If I called from another state, he would ask a few questions about my life, then drift back to how things are at home, which meant how things were for her. My grandmother, Lillian Mullen, saw all of this from the small bedroom she moved into when the stairs became too much. Whenever I visited, she would wave me in and close the door behind us. In that room, the rest of the script fell away. I was not the unreliable one there. I was just Sierra. She listened when I talked about short projects and constantly packing suitcases. She never asked when I would settle down. Instead, she said she liked that my life did not move in straight lines. It was the only corner of the house where my choices did not feel like a problem. Outside that room, the hierarchy stayed the same. Kendra drove Grandma to appointments, kept a notebook of medications, and argued with insurance representatives while my parents watched. Every time I came home for a holiday, it was clear the house had kept moving without me. My suitcase would still be by the door when my mother, Denise Mullen, started listing everything my sister had done that month. It sounded less like an update and more like a report card I had not passed. Official envelopes went into a pile with Kendra's name on it. She opened them, skimmed, and gave my parents the version she thought they needed. Once, during a winter visit, I watched her explain a letter from an insurance company to Grandma. She left out penalties and conditions that would have scared her, presenting a softer version of the truth. The first time my grandmother mentioned the house directly to me, we were sitting on the edge of her bed. She had one of my old sketches in her hands, a quick drawing of the front porch I had made as a teenager. Her voice was tired, but there was no hesitation. She told me that when she was gone, the house was supposed to be mine. Not half mine, not a talking point for a family meeting, but something clear and simple with my name on it. She said every group needed at least one thing that was not up for debate. In our family, this would be it. I tried to argue that it would be fairer to divide everything evenly, but she only shook her head and moved on. My parents treated that decision like it was theoretical, something far off that did not require them to adjust how they behaved. "We will see when the time comes," my father said once, as if wills were suggestions instead of instructions. Kendra hardly reacted at all when it came up. She did not complain or ask why. She simply went on organizing calendars, tracking bills, and driving Grandma to appointments. By the time my grandmother passed, the routine around her had become automatic. There was no question who would make the calls, gather the keys, and box up her clothes. Kendra handled the funeral home and spoke to the bank. She walked through the house with a clipboard, noting what needed to be repaired. I flew in, hugged people, and stood where I was told. When the will was finally read and the house in Richmond was listed under my name alone, the air in the room shifted. My parents looked surprised, then blank. My sister's expression barely changed, but something in her eyes did. A small flash of calculation that came and went so fast I might have missed it if I had not been watching her instead of the papers on the table. By the time the next business day started, my inbox already held a new message from my attorney. He had attached several links and a short note asking me to confirm in writing that I had never signed anything related to selling my grandmother's house. I sent the confirmation in one line and waited, staring at the cursor until my phone rang. His tone was steady, not dramatic, which somehow made every word land harder. He told me he had pulled the property records for the address in Richmond. The county site showed a familiar parcel number, the same one printed on the papers my grandmother had kept beside her bed. The ownership history had been quiet for years. Then, less than a week earlier, a new entry appeared. According to the records, the house had been transferred from my grandmother's estate to an out-of-state couple through a warranty deed. My name sat on the seller line. I had never touched that deed, but there it was, typed cleanly beside a slanted signature that was supposed to be mine. My attorney, Nathan Cole, walked me through each part without speeding up. The legal description of the property, the date of signing, the notary seal in the corner. The digital copy showed a stamp from a notary public I had never heard of, operating in a county I had never visited. Nathan said he had checked the notary's name against the state database. The commission number on the deed did not match the one assigned to that person. It was off by a digit, small enough that most people would never question it. He did not call it a mistake. He called it suspicious. He told me he had compared the signature on the deed with documents that actually carried my handwriting, the ones I had sent when we first set up my estate plan. On the deed, the strokes were too slow in some places and too sharp in others, as if someone had traced my name after staring at it too long. It was close enough to pass a quick glance. It would not survive scrutiny. He asked where I was physically when the supposed signing took place. I gave him the city and the kind of work I had been doing that week. There was no way to twist the facts to make me present in Richmond on that day. I had receipts, emails, and a flight confirmation. My absence was documented from multiple angles. Even saying it out loud, listing each piece of proof, made the whole thing feel less like a misunderstanding and more like a planned move executed behind my back. Then he laid out the part that mattered most. If my name had been placed on that deed without my consent, and if the notary information was wrong, the sale was built on a rotten foundation. The buyers might not have known, but the paperwork itself was compromised. There was another detail buried in the recording data. The deed had been filed by a title company in Richmond that often handled local sales for older neighborhoods. Someone had walked into their office with a stack of documents and a story polished enough to move the process forward. On the electronic file, there was a line naming the person who had delivered the documents for recording. Seeing my sister's name there would not have surprised me. What made my skin prickle was the way it appeared. Not as a relative or a helper, but as the authorized point of contact for the estate. Nathan did not speculate. He stuck to the timeline. The estate had not been fully settled when the deed was signed. No court paperwork listed my sister as a personal representative with full authority to dispose of the property. There was no record of me granting power of attorney that would allow someone to sign on my behalf. On paper, I was the owner. On paper, I was also the one who had supposedly agreed to sell. He said he had already flagged the transaction with the title company, asking them to place a hold on any funds that had not yet been fully dispersed. In his world, that was the first move. You stop the money from moving farther out of reach and let the rest of the system catch up. When the call ended, I saved every document he sent into a folder with a new name. I did not call my parents. I did not text my sister. I sat with the quiet hum of my computer and the knowledge that what had been done was not just cruel, it was illegal. And now there was proof. In Richmond, the story of the sale was already being told without me. I did not hear the first version in real time. I pieced it together from messages, from the way people spoke to me, from the silences that settled between their sentences. It was clear my sister had not presented what happened as a mistake or a question. To her, it was an accomplishment. She moved through our parents' living room like a project manager closing out a file. The house was too much work. The market was good. The buyers were ready. The documents were handled. All they had to do was be grateful. I was the only loose thread in that neat summary, and she had already found a way to tie me off. To my parents, she was the daughter who had driven Grandma to every appointment and argued with every clerk. When she said she had taken care of the last big task by selling the house, they had a reason to exhale. One more responsibility lifted. One more thing they did not have to face. I saw it in the way my father spoke when he finally called me that week. His voice carried the tired satisfaction of someone who believed a heavy chore was done. He said the house had become a burden. He said my sister had stepped up. He did not ask whether I had agreed. He spoke as if that part had been settled long before he ever dialed my number. In his version, the sale was practical. The money could help with expenses. No one was using the house. I lived in another state, and Grandma was gone. Questioning the decision would not only be inconvenient, it would sound ungrateful. My mother's tone matched his. When she got on the line, she talked about repairs the house had needed, about the stress of dealing with contractors, about how hard it had been on my sister to juggle her own job and all this paperwork. The sale was framed as an act of sacrifice on Kendra's part, another entry on the long list of things she did for the family. My role in that version of events was background noise. I was the distant child who bounced between cities, the one who sent flowers instead of showing up for every appointment. My absence was not just circumstantial, it was a convenient explanation. If I was not there, I could be written into whatever shape the story required. No one asked how I felt about losing the only physical thing my grandmother had put in my name. No one brought up the conversation on the edge of her bed when she told me the house was supposed to be the one thing that was not up for discussion. In their retelling, it had never been a promise. It was a line item that needed to be cleared. Kendra understood exactly how to lean on that dynamic. She did not need to raise her voice or insult me outright. All she had to do was emphasize how much she had handled and how far away I lived. From there, the conclusions drew themselves. I was the one who would make things harder if I pushed back. She was the one who made things easier by acting. The text she sent to me had been blunt, but the language she used at home was smoother. She knew how to talk about doing what Grandma would have wanted, without naming the part where Grandma had already written down what she wanted. She knew my parents would rather believe they were honoring a vague wish than admit they had ignored a clear instruction. On my screen, the distance between us measured in miles. In their living room, it measured in stories. They had the version where my sister solved a problem. I had the version where my name had been forged onto a deed. Both versions could not be true at the same time. I did not argue with my parents on that call. I asked simple questions and listened to the way they circled around the sale, careful not to linger on details they could not explain. Every answer they gave added another weight to the file sitting on my laptop. At home, the script stayed the same. My sister handled things. My parents accepted that. I was expected to adjust myself around the shape of their relief, to nod along and move on. This time, I let them talk without correcting them. Letting their version stand for a little longer did not mean I believed it. It only meant that when it finally collided with the paperwork Nathan had uncovered, no one would be able to say they had not known what they were choosing. 2 days later, the calm broke. I was working through small tasks when an email from Nathan slid to the top of my screen. The subject line was short, but it changed how I looked at every message after it. He wrote that he had spoken directly with the title company in Richmond and that the sale of my grandmother's house was no longer quietly moving along in the background. The company handling the closing had kept a portion of the proceeds in their escrow account, waiting for some remaining documents related to the estate. It was supposed to be a formality that would clear with time. After Nathan's call and the packet of records he sent over, it turned into a question mark. He explained that he had laid out the inconsistencies, the signature that did not match my files, the notary commission number that did not line up with state records, the lack of any court order giving my sister authority to sign for me. On their end, a compliance officer had stepped in to review everything. What had looked like just another neighborhood sale suddenly had its own internal file with highlighted lines and sticky notes. Nathan did not sound excited when he summarized it. He sounded methodical. The title company could not decide intent, he said, but they could decide risk. Right now, the risk sat on their desk. They agreed to a temporary hold on any funds that had not yet been released. The buyers had wired their money. Some costs had already been paid out to third parties. But the portion marked as net proceeds from the sale of the house, the part that was supposed to end up in an account connected to my sister, would not be moving anywhere until the questions were resolved. He also told me that he had sent a formal letter to the buyer's side, outlining the concerns without accusing them of anything. They had relied on the paperwork placed in front of them. If the seller side was compromised, they were as much at risk as I was. No one wanted to end up with a deed that could be challenged later. Later that afternoon, Nathan forwarded a message from the escrow officer who had handled the closing, a woman named Marianne Porter. She wrote that when the sale file first crossed her desk, it had seemed familiar enough. An estate, an old house, a family trying to close a chapter. She had seen dozens of versions of that story. The packet had come in with my sister listed as the point of contact for the estate, and a stack of signed pages to match. Now, with Nathan's evidence in front of her, Marianne's tone shifted. She confirmed that the disbursement schedule had been paused. Any future step would be taken only after her legal department finished reviewing the documents and after she received something in writing from me or a court. Reading her email, it struck me how much of modern life rested on assumptions. A name on a line, a stamp in a corner, a file moving from one desk to another. As long as no one looked too closely, everything worked. As soon as someone did, the whole structure could tilt. While Nathan was building his paper trail, my phone started to light up in a different way. My sister's calls came first, each one sliding across the screen, unanswered. Then my parents. Then a string of short messages from relatives who never texted me unless someone was sick or engaged. The pattern made its own kind of sense. News travels fast inside a family when it feels like an attack. To them, the hold on the funds was not a neutral legal step. It was me interfering. It was me turning a private decision into something that involved companies and letters and outside eyes. Nathan reminded me that I did not owe anyone an immediate explanation. The documents spoke for themselves. If my sister wanted to know why the money was not arriving, she could start by looking at the pages she had presented as the truth. I watched the notifications stack up and disappear. Each missed call was proof that the sale was no longer the quiet success she thought it would be. For the first time since her message about selling the house, I could feel the ground shifting away from her version of the story. The house in Richmond still stood where it had always stood. Its rooms were the same. Its siding still peeled in the same places. On paper, though, everything was different now. The file with my name on it no longer sat in a drawer, ignored. It was open on multiple desks under bright lights, and no one could pretend they did not see it. The ringing finally caught me early the next morning, before my brain had fully climbed out of sleep. My sister's name kept flashing across the screen until refusing to answer felt less like control and more like delay. When I picked up, her voice did not sound like the woman who had sent a casual message about selling our grandmother's house. The smooth certainty was gone. What came through the speaker was thin, carrying a panic that made each sentence trip over the one behind it. She did not start with a greeting. She went straight into questions. Had I spoken to anyone at the bank? Had I contacted some office in Richmond? Had I done something to mess with the transfer? The urgency in her tone said she already knew something had stopped moving. I did not give her details. I did not mention Nathan or Marianne by name. I said only that I had been asked to confirm whether I had ever signed away the house. There was a silence on her end, the kind that makes you picture the other person staring at a spot on the wall, trying to decide which story to set in motion. When she spoke again, the panic had a new edge. She began listing reasons. The house was too expensive to keep. Our parents were overwhelmed. The neighborhood was changing. She had handled everything and expected me to be grateful that she had taken care of it. Underneath each justification was the same message. She carried the weight, so she was entitled to make the call. I let her finish. Then I told her, in simple terms, that my name did not belong on any document I had not signed, and that using it without my consent had consequences. I kept my voice even. I did not ask why she thought she could do it. I treated it like a fact, not a feeling. Her tone shifted again, sliding from panic into anger. She said I was overreacting, that I was turning a family matter into something cold and formal. She accused me of being selfish and ungrateful after everything she had done for our grandmother. The words came in different arrangements. None of them moved me. What struck me most was what she did not say. She did not claim that I had signed anything. She did not insist the notary stamp was valid. She did not explain how my name had ended up on the deed. She stayed inside the safe walls of intention and sacrifice, never stepping into the space where the law lived. When the call ended, I sat with what had just happened. The version of the story where she had simply handled things could not stand next to the one where my signature had been copied onto legal documents. For the first time, it felt like she understood that too. Later that day, I received an email from Nathan. He had been contacted by the buyer's attorney. The couple who thought they had purchased my grandmother's house wanted to avoid being dragged into a legal fight. They asked for clarification in writing about my position and whether I intended to challenge the sale. Nathan told me this was the moment to remove any doubt. He drafted a statement confirming that I had never signed the deed, never authorized anyone to sign for me, and never agreed to sell the property. He added that we were prepared to let a court sort out what that meant if the parties involved could not resolve it on their own. Before he sent it, he asked if I was sure. Taking that step meant leaving the role my family preferred for me, the one where I absorbed decisions quietly and adjusted myself around them. There would be no sliding back into calling this a misunderstanding once the message went out. I told him I was ready. The hold on the funds had stirred my sister. The written statement would do more than that. It would put every party on notice that the story they had been operating under was incomplete. By evening, the buyer's side had responded. They indicated they would cooperate with any investigation and that they expected the seller's representative to explain how a contested signature had made it into their file. The polite language did not hide the reality. Pressure was no longer coming only from my end. It was pressing inward from more than one direction. My phone stayed close to me that night, screen dark, but heavy. More calls were coming. Whatever waited on the other side, none of it would change the fact that the narrative my sister had built in our parents' living room had cracked. For the first time, other people had stepped into the space where she used to stand alone. Change did not arrive with shouting. It arrived in documents. Over the next few weeks, Nathan kept me updated in plain, careful language. The title company finished its review and confirmed that the deed with my name on it could not be trusted. The buyers, who had never met me, agreed to unwind the transaction rather than risk owning a house attached to a dispute. I never spoke to them. I only saw their names on short letters and felt a quiet wave of relief that they were willing to step back. The sale was reversed. The house went back into the estate. The remaining money held in escrow was returned to the buyers. The extra costs of the failed closing did not vanish. They landed where they should have landed from the start. On my sister. Nathan explained that she could either accept a settlement that matched what she had done or try to defend the documents in court. For a few days, she seemed to lean toward fighting. Then her own attorney must have given her the same reality Nathan had given me. Facts were not going to twist themselves into a kinder shape. In the end, she signed. The agreement required her to reimburse the buyers for expenses they could not recover elsewhere, and to pay the title company's added fees from her own account. It also required her to admit, in clear language, that she had used my name on the deed without my knowledge or consent. The sentence did not repair the breach, but it finally put the blame in the right place. My parents heard about it in pieces. At first, they focused on the money and how hard my sister worked, how unfair it seemed that she had to pay for a decision everyone knew we would reach eventually. It took longer for them to sit with the fact that my signature had been copied onto legal documents, that my name had been used as a tool instead of a boundary. I let the dates and the documents carry the weight. For most of my life, I had been the one trying to make my choices sound reasonable inside a house that had already decided which daughter was dependable and which one was not. This time, instead of explaining myself, I stayed still and watched what happened when the facts spoke without my help. The last real conversation I had with my sister took place in a neutral office, in a short conference room that smelled like printer ink and carpet cleaner. She arrived first and stared at the table when I walked in. No one raised a voice. The attorneys passed pages across the table. When it was my turn, I read each paragraph and signed where Nathan pointed. I was confirming that the title would reflect what had always been true. The house was mine, until I chose otherwise. When it was her turn, my sister's hand shook slightly as she picked up the pen. She signed the confession clause quickly. There were no apologies, no sudden explanations, no plea for another chance. Just ink on paper and a quiet shift from argument to record. In the hallway afterward, she finally looked at me. There was a question in her face that she never turned into words, something between disbelief and anger that I had let this go all the way instead of folding for the sake of peace. I did not fill the silence for her. There was nothing left to trade. I did not tell her not to call me. I did not need to. I blocked her number, archived our old messages, and removed her from every form where her name still sat next to mine. When my parents asked why I was going so far, I answered once. I said that trust is not something you break, and then put back on the shelf expecting it to look the same. The house in Richmond no longer felt like an obligation I had to defend. Once the title was clean, I made a choice my grandmother would have understood. I listed the house for sale again, this time through a process that left no blanks and no favors. The proceeds went into an account under my name alone. I used part of it to buy a small place in the city where I was actually living, a space that did not belong to family history or family arguments. Another part went into savings with clear labels and passwords no one else had. None of it felt like a prize. It felt like finally holding what had been meant for me from the beginning. Looking back, the most important change was not the reversal of the sale or the numbers on a statement. It was the boundary that formed when I stopped trying to be the softer version of myself that made things easier for everyone else. Protecting what someone leaves you is not just about property. It is about refusing to let their trust be rewritten by whoever speaks the loudest after they are gone. If you are listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own family in it, I hope you hear more than the conflict. I hope you hear permission to ask questions, to read what you sign, to slow down before you let your name be placed on anything you do not understand. You do not owe your silence to anyone who treats your rights as optional. Thank you for staying with me through the end of this story. If it made you think about your own boundaries or about the people who trusted you with something that matters, share it or leave a comment. I would like to know how far these lessons travel and what they bring up for you.